Good evening, everybody. My name is Mackowiak, and my presentation today is going to be on psychological skills training as it pertains to sports psychology, and more specifically, collegiate athletes. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to explain and I'm going to break down exactly what psychological skills training is. We're going to go through each of the phases because there are 3 of them, and then we're also going to talk about the implementation of psychological skills training. We're going to do, like the who's, what, when's, why's, and how long. And then to conclude, I'm going to give you guys some hot questions that do kind of surround the topic as a whole. So let's get into it. All right, so psychological skills training, what it is it's a collection of different skills, techniques, strategies that are usually implemented by a psychological professional or a coach that are going to aid the student athlete in kind of strengthening one of their weak spots, whether it be, their levels of anxiety, levels of depression, their ability to focus. And psychological skills training is kind of an all-encompassing term for this entire implementation of these different techniques. So psychological skills training, it is formally broken down into 3 phases. So the first phase of psychological skills training is referred to as the educational phase. So what the educational phase is, it's kind of like the preliminary kind of like an assessment phase where the athlete will be instructed on and described different, the different techniques that might be used and just made familiar with the concepts themselves. And then the biggest point surrounding the educational phase is this idea of self-assessment. And self-assessment meaning it's the job of the student athlete to kind of be able to break down exactly where their weaknesses lie, and not so much why they are the way they are, because they kind of learn that as they go, but just to be able to convey their weaknesses and be able to, help this psychological professional help them, because without them knowing, there's no way for anything to get fixed. So a big method that's used for this idea of self-assessment is what we refer to as performance profiling. So performance profiling, what it is you can actually, chart an entire, it's usually done in a circle, or that was the example that we had learned actually through our lectures, where an athlete will, put on different labels of different sections of almost like a pie chart. And they'll put, their self-control, focus, anxieties, and they'll kind of rank them, 1 to 10 to help them, kind of self-prescribe and figure out, where their weaknesses might lie. So once they're through with the educational phase and they're made more aware of, what issues they might be having, they move into what is called the acquisition phase, which is phase number 2. The acquisition phase is, so once they're made familiar with the different strategies and different techniques they might be able to use, this phase is mostly used towards building skills. And when you say building skills, developing, different strategies that might help them focus, different mental cues, implementation of, imagery or, different communication techniques that they might be lacking, and really getting a grip on the strategy so you can move forward and into the 3rd phase, which is the practice phase. And the practice phase is kind of where the implementation begins. The practice phase, it's the integration of these skills into their everyday lives, little by little, to the point where it does become natural, and these skills are kind of molded into their everyday, competition mindsets, or their academic mindsets, if that's where they're struggling. And a big thing in the practice phase is to be able to chart your progress, because at this point, you've been made aware of where your issues are, what these strategies are and which ones might be most helpful to you. And it's important for both you and the psychological skills professional to be able to make sure that there is progress being made toward, strengthening these weaknesses. Because if you could be practicing, a certain technique that might not be working for so long, and then, after 3 months you haven't made any progress, and it kind of be a snowball into, a worse situation for everybody. So those are the 3 phases of, psychological skills training. And the 3 phases are pretty directly related to the points that we're going to hit on the implementation. So with the implementation of the psychological skills training, for the who's going to be, directing this, it's mainly going to be either a coach or like an authority figure, or just in general, like a skilled psychological professional, whether it's a student athlete psychologist or just a general psychologist. And it's important that these people are certified, because if you get somebody who thinks they know what they're doing, very often can they be doing more harm than good, and obviously that's not the direction we want to take if somebody's already struggling in certain areas. The when. So with being a student athlete comes an array of different struggles, especially during their seasons of competition, having not only go to practice and make sure that they're performing at the highest level on the field, but also making sure that their academics aren't being hindered, and they're being able to keep their grades up, and the stresses of everyday social life. And that is why it is commonly believed that the best time to implement psychological skills training is actually in the off season, when the stresses might be there, but they're not going to be as amplified as they would be at full-fledged like athletic career mode. So that way the athlete will be able to better focus on the training itself, rather than having their mind be in a million different places between athletics and academics and just the regular everyday struggles of college. The why kind of goes back to the educational phase. The why can be just because of any mental issue that they might be having. Like I said, it might be focus related, anxiety related, depression related, communication issues, pretty much anything that cognitively just isn't functioning to the highest degree that it could be, will be a reason why that these skills might be implemented. For how long this is supposed to be implemented is determined as, it's sort of little by little, like small spurts, but often. And the actual number is 10 to 15 minutes per day at about 3 to 5 days per week. And the reason for this is that you don't want to do like a whole lecture and have these people, like these students, overwhelmed with all this information. And it kind of gives them a chance to really feel different strategies out as they move forward, and to kind of make them as comfortable as possible in a time where it is going to be stressful, trying to figure out, trying to do like self-assess and really improve in these respects. So again, it was 10 to 15 minutes per day at about 3 to 5 days per week to start. And then, the what, it kind of goes back to the kind of relates to the why. The different strategies, it could be, imagery, learning how to really, picture yourself in, picture yourself like winning and performing well, that can help you actually in competition. Goal setting is another one. Goal setting can be important, if you're just trying to improve and you want to really see improvement, it can help you, if you want to get your batting average up to 300. You're not just going to go from 200 to 300. You got to hit 225 and then 250, 275. And setting goals will keep you motivated in longer term goals, and it'll just help you keep the spirits high by seeing your own improvement on paper. So the implementation of psychological skills training, if you can answer all these questions, usually you'll get a successful result. And then now that we've talked about the 3 phases, what is psychological skills training and the implementation of, we kind of have a general base knowledge of the topic at hand. So I do have a couple questions that are they're relevant, discussed amongst professionals, different levels. The first question is, are NCAA athletes well equipped enough to not only acquire these skills, but to be able to seek them out on their own merits? The reason there's a few different issues surrounding athletes and success in psychological skills training. The first one, there is this just overall stigma. It's looked upon, sadly, it is looked upon as, a weakness to kind of go seek out help, which it really shouldn't be, because you're trying to better yourself, and your mental health is one of the most important things you have. You don't want to overwhelm yourself, and it's almost like it's commonly looked down upon. Oh, he's messed up. He's going to see a counselor, and it's really important to be able to look past that. But the college pressures and stuff like that can really play a part in your decision-making process, especially as it pertains to your mental health. An additional one would be just an overall lack of resources. So there are professionals on campuses that are there to aid in psychological skills training, but there's not necessarily trained full-time clinical psychologists that are capable of kind of handling you in any direction, whereas maybe just the general staff of an athletic counselor might not be able to help so much. So your resources might be limited depending on what school you're at, or how big the school is. And that's another sad truth, is that even if you're willing to go seek out the help for yourself, you might not be able to really get the help that you need if college isn't providing the resources. And that kind of plays into the last issue with this question is there's kind of a fine line between what a sport psychologist can handle and a clinical psychologist can handle. And because there's might be a lack of your general professional psychologists on site at all times, there's kind of not like a disagreement. There's kind of some gray area as to who can actually help you with certain things. And I know it sounds really similar to the last point. I'm gonna try to set it up a little bit differently. But your academic, your athletic counselor, he might be able to help you kind of maybe increase, if you have a motivation issue, he might be able to help you with motivation, or issues with your self-confidence. But if you have a legitimate issue with focus to the point where you might actually need to be prescribed a medication to help you, an athletic counselor couldn't do that for you because it's not in their scope of practice. And that is another thing. You might think you're getting the help you need when you really need more, and that's kind of where that third point lies. So yeah, that big question surrounding, and there's an article on the actual NCAA website called Mind, Body, and Power that kind of dives a little bit deeper into each of those points, and it's actually where I drew the question from itself. And the second question it's also pertaining to the NCAA, and it's a little bit of of course, that question until you really think about it, and I'll play the devil's advocate and kind of touch on both sides. But the question is, should athletes at the Division I levels have the exact same access to psychological skills training and psychological professionals as levels 2 and 3 and NAIA? Should every skill set of athletes have the same access to the same resources? And when you first hear this question, I even myself, I was obviously duh. These kids are everybody's an athlete, everybody's a student athlete, and it just kind of makes sense that everybody would have you're literally a part of the same organization, just on a different skill level. And kind of struck me as a kind of an obvious question. But there are points for the opposing argument that do need to be addressed. The first one being, and this is it can be an anecdotal, and it's completely on an individual basis, but it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that the pressures of a Division I athlete are always going to be equal to the pressures of a Division III athlete. And let me explain that, because athletes typically, and you can go up in the divisions. I mean, you can really improve and make your way up into the minor league versions of whatever sport you play. But Division I athletes are more often going to be focusing on making it into the professionals of whatever sport they're playing, because they feel that they have the best shot because they've been placed in this higher division. So with that, in my opinion, there would be an added pressure to where if I'm going to a D3 school, I mean, at that point, I kind of been made aware that I'm not elite. I might be a good player who might have just gotten a little bit of a sticky situation, or just kind of ended up taking a different route for different reasons at a D3 school. But I don't think it's too far-fetched to say that a Division I athlete might be a little bit more worried about their performance on the field, because they're a little bit closer to this dream that they might have, and that could definitely create additional pressures if you're really on the cusp of making a career out of a sport. So that's the first point. And another thing, okay, so the idea of a universal resources for all students, it's a little rocky, because because you want to believe that everybody deserves the same access. But it was from the same article, this question that I drew from, about the mind, body, and the power on the NCAA website, and the phrase "nature of the beast" was used. And I thought this was a little harsh, but in everyday life, whether you're talking about NCAA sports or just socioeconomic class, just your economic status in general, not everybody is going to have the same access. Your benefits at your job at Taco Bell might be pretty standard versus the benefits of a doctor in a hospital. And there is this divide, for a lack of better terms, of perceived value depending on what division you are in. So that kind of, and the term "nature of the beast" is a little harsh in my opinion, but that's, again, the devil's advocate. It's kind of how life is. You're not always gonna have the same access as the next guy just because you might be part of the same organization. Again, you would like to believe that everybody should have similar access, and I think in a perfect world that's what it would be like. But there is, a noticeable decline as you go from D1 to D3 in not only the accessibility of these resources, but the quality of the resources. However, a different article, whose name escapes me, but it was written in 2017, and it was actually saying that students in general are on the upswing as far as seeking out the mental help that they need, which was a really, alleviating stat to hear, because, suicide rates in the entire country are up, and, there's a large percentage of them that do come from, youth, whether it's related to sport or not. But yeah, these struggles are serious, and being in college, it's not easy, and being a college athlete, I couldn't imagine that being, stress-free 100% of the time. And that's why, the implementation of psychological skills training can really, really make or break your mindset. If you're doing these things right, everybody's gonna have stresses, but if you can find the right strategy for you and the right technique for you and implement it in the way that is prescribed, you might be able to make your way out of it and make your way back into the mental clarity that you need to succeed in both your academics and your sports. So to wrap it up, psychological skills training, again, is kind of the all-encompassing term for everything I just explained. The strategies, techniques, the who, when, why, how long, what. And I'd be curious if in the comment sections if you guys have any thoughts on the two questions. I'd like to hear some additional opinions. But for now, I'm going to wrap it up. Again, my name is Mackowiak, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.